made those
everywhere. All right.
put together and I used coconut oil. That's why they taste good.
Colonels, ladies, gentlemen, angels, we have some very special guests today that have come down to spend a nice crisp morning with us. Our friends Pat Epps, Richard Taylor, and Neil Estes are going to tell us about a little adventure that they had a few years ago in slightly colder weather.
Yeah.
Oh, it wasn't for you.
Take it away.
Lights. Got some lights.
Lights off.
Lights off.
Thank you.
Camera, action.
Camera on. Action.
All right. Master Taylor, you gonna run the machine? You know, last time we showed up here a month ago. Oh, I won't tell.
I won't tell.
There we go.
They're already laughing. You just said last time. All right, yeah, the last time we had equipment failure, but we stumbled through it. To get this thing started, we have to go back a little bit before the Greenland story, which was in 1980. Some of you saw that little Bonanza we flew down from Atlanta in, little red, white, and blue Bonanza. Well, that same plane in 1980, Captain Klondike here and I took it up to the magnetic North Pole. And we got some pilots.
We got some pilots.
Yeah, we got some pilots.
Everybody always wondered, what does the magnetic compass do at the magnetic North Pole? And that's what we went up at. We tried it, and finally the third time we hit it. How about Oshkosh? Everybody been to Oshkosh? Yeah? Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we sit under the wing of Vernon Martin's Bonanza, and we had tried in '77 to land at Nassausawack, Greenland, the southern tip, BW-1. Bad weather, we landed at Kulusuk instead, ferrying an Aztec to England, sell it so we could go to the Paris Air Show, and we did. Anyway, we tried. It'll take me a long time, but Taylor tried it. 78, we got halfway, turned around, came back. Mr. 79, Taylor goes by himself, and 80
in a Mooney.
In the Mooney,
Yeah.
by himself. He got up there halfway, or farther, up above Church Hill, and
In the Arctic Circle.
and he started thinking twice about where he was and why. Turned around and came home. But in 1980, we did go up there and had an opportunity to land, and nothing, and at what, Resolute, which is a couple of 100 miles from the magnetic North Pole. And next day we then went to the magnetic North Pole, roll the pole, unroll the pole, and Master Taylor.
All right, pilots, what does the magnetic compass do? Inverted, positive G's, directly over the magnetic North Pole.
Spin?
Spin?
Yeah.
No.
Or does it?
Stand still.
Stand still?
Yeah.
It does stand still. Very good, very good.
I've been there.
Inverted.
Climb.
I was not inverted.
When you get up to within, maybe 50 miles of the magnetic pole, it's not like, the magnetic pole is not like the North Pole. The North Pole is a point that the Earth spins around. The magnetic pole is a region that all of those vertical magnetic forces, you remember when you're in high school and you put a magnet under metal filings and it makes this little shape? Well, it's a three-dimensional shape, and when you get up close to where all those forces come in vertically, the needle on the compass cannot find a horizontal component, so it stops. And as you come up to it, in that red, white, and blue Bonanza out there, that compass stopped at 330 degrees. And our conjecture is it either stopped when you got close, or it finds the composite magnetic field of the airplane. Whatever it is, it stops. And so we rolled it this way, then we were the first pilots to unroll the pole. And then, for good luck, we rolled it again, came back to Resolute. From Resolute Bay, Canada, we came back to Greenland, and where Pat was talking about Narsarsuaq, when we were trying to fly to Europe, Pat was trying to make a landing into Narsarsuaq, and he failed. He couldn't get in. I told him he could. He said he couldn't. We ended up going so he needed to go back to Narsarsuaq to finish that mission. Now, how dumb is that?
And we
but that's
did.
how it started.
So we got addicted to the North at that time, and that was 1980. 78, I'd heard about these airplanes landing on the ice cap, and Southern Airways pilot Roy Deegan and what was the other? Rajani. They had studied it, they knew about it. They had come to my FBO PDK, showed us pictures of this 1942, 8 airplanes on the ice cap. And all they had to do was go up and brush the snow off. And
Oh, yeah.
so in 78, I told them I'm interested in putting gas in King Airs and Learjets. I'm not interested in Warbirds. Massa Taylor. So 81 comes, I've finally gotten me a Lear type rating, brand new one, pulls up on the ramp, and I know it cost that guy $2.5 million. I say, Mr. Gay, that's a beautiful airplane. He says, yes, but I always wanted a P-38. And I swear, that's all he said. And all of a sudden, I remember where 6 P-38s were. I run upstairs, call Richard. I said, Richard, I got us a deal.
You said you got a fish.
I'm gonna be the co-pilot on this Learjet. We going up there, brush the snow off the airplane, crank them up.
Fly back, yeah.
And why, all of a sudden, I'm interested in well, I like to sell airplanes, so we're going to get that. And of course, you know, who designed it? The P-38? Everybody.
Kelly Johnson.
Yeah.
Kelly Johnson. And of course, Kelly Johnson, P-38, what's that three-tailed airliner?
TWA.
Constellation, the
Super Connie.
Super Connie.
SR-72.
And then
SR-71 and the U-2.
104.
And the U-2, yeah.
104 U-2 SR-71.
All right, so let's talk about the airplanes. These were the last photographs taken from the flight of airplanes. There was, the war started, what, in 41, and in 42, and so we were sending airplanes to England on the Lend-Lease program. Then General Carl Spaatz got the idea of flying the planes because we were putting them on Liberty ships, and the convoys would zigzag across the Atlantic, and then they'd get sunk by U-boats. So they started flying planes to Europe. And the first flight of Operation Bolero, and Bolero, it got its name, if you remember, it starts out very slow, it's repetitious, it's got rhythm to it, and it gets louder and louder as it goes along, and then women swoon at the end. Well, this was the idea of flying planes to Europe. The first flight of Bolero who flew later in the war and maybe ended it. But Paul Tibbets flew a B-17 on a flight called Tomcat Black. And he was in his B-17, and there were 4 P-38s that would follow it. He was the mothership, and they would follow. And Tibbets made it across with his 4 P-38s in tow. The second 2 flights was Tomcat Yellow and Tomcat Green. They took off from Goose Bay.
Here we are with
Brad McManus.
Brad McManus. He was tail end. He thought he was the lowest on gas. So he put his gear down to land first and did. The other 7 airplanes circling overhead, he touches down, runs about 300 feet, drops the nose wheel down, and he flips over. The other planes circling overhead know they've lost him because all they see is a big puff of smoke, or really just dust. And then he rolls the window down. No, he rolled the window up.
He's upside down.
There he is. Brad McManus, and we got to meet him over at Beaufort, South Carolina. And here's Carl Rudder, who later ran the base up at Dobbins, and that's where those airline pilots here heard about those planes back in the mid-70s.
But take a look at Brad McManus, because we're going to see him later in this slideshow. 50 years later, to the day that they crashed, we took him up in a King Air and took him out on the ice cap, and he did a little commemoration for his buddies who didn't make it through the war.
As Carl Rudder on the right, we do this slideshow before we ever recovered the airplane. And summary up at Marietta, we show it, and Carl Rudder's out in the lobby, in the audience there. And we said, is that about how it was or something? Look at the props.
Look at
There it
them.
is.
Oh, yeah.
There they go.
Isn't that neat? And then this plane, it was the last one to land. He was running out of, well, he ran out of gas. He then feathers the props to come in, and he feathers them so that one prop is up and two are spread, because they're thinking the planes can be rescued. And so they all belly in. This plane we will bring up 50 years later, and this is Glacier Galley.
So here we are looking at these pictures in 1981, and all you got to do is brush the snow off the plane, because global warming, and it doesn't snow up there anyway, and so all you got to do is brush the snow off. You don't even have to replace the props. All you got to do is dig out from the gear, drop the gear down, make your ramp, pull it up, and hell, crank it up, put gas in it. They out of gas, so.
We know they're out of gas.
Yeah. And from 1981 to 88, we're gonna brush the snow off.
And we believed it. Now, I mean, you laugh now, but everybody knows the Arctic is arid. Everybody knows that, except not everybody knows that on that east coast of Greenland, the Gulf Stream goes up and bends over and warms up Iceland and England. And they get snow, or they get fog and everything, and it's warm. And it dumps huge amounts of snow in this area where there's no population. And so the planes did get snowed on. There you can see number 4 engine on the B-17. They cut the propeller blades off so they could run the engine or charge the batteries or run the radios and call for help. And so this is our first expedition, and we're in a Cessna 180. That's Russ Rajani, me, Epps is standing in a hole, and Roy Deegan. And we're ready to go out there, crank up these airplanes and fly them off the ice cap.
The Learjet didn't work out.
We couldn't have finished it after all.
Brothers, Aztec, Doug, Delta pilot, we fly up there, charter that 185, go out to the ice cap. We're going to spend 2 days out there, 3. Here we are with our magnetometers. You want to find, you go out on the beach looking for some metal. Well, these is, we went around the Cap Peachtree looking for all the water lines.
And we got good at it. We could find water lines at PDK easy.
Take it, hang a recorder around your neck, and LED readout, and if it varied any, maybe you had metal under you. And so we go out there. Here we showed up on I think a Tuesday, and the charter pilot dropped off 2, came back to Kulasuk, picked up Richard and I, and then we got this nice 4-man tent.
And we have 4 guys. It all,
Yeah. So that's
4
all.
guys don't fit in a 4-man tent. I'll tell you that. when we found that out.
So there's our kitchen and all our goods. We got a Burnson Burney, whatever you call it, Coleman stove. That's right.
Well, we went out
Coleman
with,
stove. We got 1 gallon can of fluid to keep it running, and
well,
that's all you need.
so Epps takes one of the magnetometers, I take the other, we set up a grid, we're real scientific guys, and we set up the grid, we start walking, and we're out there, I mean, we're not there 10 minutes. And Epps is over there, I got it, come over here, come here. And so I'm looking down at my LED readout, and it's reading 50 microns, which we had determined that was within 20 feet of an airplane. First of all, we thought the tails would be sticking up out of the snow. We really believed it. But then when we landed, we had the coordinates, and when we landed, there was nothing there. We set up the grid. So he's so excited, I just took my magnetometer, put it down, went over there and looked at his. When I got there, it had stopped reading. I said, well, great, because I found it also. And so he comes over, he looks at mine, and it's reading 0 again also. What we found out was that magnetometers don't work. We came back, went to Georgia Tech. About the auroral belt, don't you? Auroral belt? Well, it's where the aurora borealis occurs, and that's where all these bending forces of the magnetic North Pole, where they bend, creates this area of magnetic disturbance that causes the aurora borealis. Well, we didn't know that. And then
They tell us about subsurface radar. That's what the Department of Transportation used to find voids.
It's quiet. You can rub your hands on the inside of the ice, and it just melts and forms a shell. And it is the safest place in the world.
It runs 1,500 miles north-south, 400 east-west, and surrounded by nice, beautiful mountains.
Yeah. Greenland is like a giant pizza. It has the crust all around the edge. It's a crater, and the ice that's held in this huge crater goes up to 10,000 feet high. So when you fly across Greenland, you got to be 10,000 plus to get across. And it is a big bowl. The mountain edges are where the people and animals and walrus and birds and Eskimos, Inuits, where they live on the perimeter of Greenland. And this is on the inside. You can taxi, as Pat said, you can taxi 1,500 miles in an airplane across the middle. There's no, I can't say there's no life.
At the crash site was 2,500 feet and pretty much stayed there. I mean, go to Maxwell, they got the records and the coordinates, and that's what we use. Had the coordinates, and we'd line up and figure out how long we ought to fly from a rock on the coastline, how many minutes we flying we ought to be, because there was no GPS at that time. Richard and Gordon Scott let them out. There's a runway down there, and here it is, Sunday afternoon, 4 o'clock, and all they got to do is drive 90 miles due east, and they'll be at the site, because this is about 100 miles inland. Our site is only 10 miles inland, so they just got 90 miles, and it's all downhill. So I'll leave them on Sunday afternoon. And
Get far enough away from the radar station that we can start using the compass. And we found out, and that's the compass right on top there. Scott, I would subtract the 45 degrees. So off we go.
Oh, goodness.
We're supposed to go that way, we go that
Oh,
way.
my goodness.
on Sunday afternoon, buddy, all you got to do is take that mag compass and keep 140. And that way you'll be tracking true east, 90 degrees. And there they are Sunday afternoon doing what they're supposed to do. You can see it's a straight track out there.
And we kept going a straight track.
And they kept going.
And then we got down to the crevasse field.
Oh my God.
So on Monday, I'm flying a 185 back and forth to the site by myself, and hauling plywood, any other equipment, food, and that's Monday. At noon, they're not there. God, what's taking them so long? Tuesday, they're not there. Wednesday, somebody else, not me. Where's Richard and Gordon? Oh, I think we'll go look. So,
Well, we'd been out there and we put treads on the wheels. We took the wheels off and put treads on the little buggy, and the axles broke twice, and we had two spare axles, and we had to replace those. And it's very cold up there. It's well below zero, and the wind's blowing, and you can't. It's very hard to work without gloves, but you have to pick up the washers and the nuts and bolts to put. Anyway, we keep going. We run out of gas and oil, and this particular crevasse, I took that picture and I was straddling it like this. And I took a picture of the camera and went between the legs upside, and then I couldn't get out. I couldn't jump back and forth. But,
those things go 2,000 feet. We had one below the camp that we just, you know, as kids, I used to jump back and forth across the creek, and when we were bored, that's what we would do.
So anyway, we get down in the crevasse field, and we're out of gas, and we're just dead in the water. We only have a little handheld radio that's got maybe a mile range, and we're just sitting there wondering why everybody's forgotten us. And then we hear a noise, and here comes Epps.
I've gone all the way to the sob story, to the radar site, watched the tracks come straight out like it's supposed to, and then it takes a 45-degree cut.
And there we were. So we finally get on the radio. He's circling overhead, and I'm telling him that we're out of gas, we're out of oil, and he comes down, and we're out of food too, because we only had 1 day of food with us, and this is day 3. And so he comes, makes a low pass, and that thing down, that right there is a quart of oil with a Hershey bar taped to it. How he did that, I have no idea.
I land beside them at about a 4,500-foot elevation. They start draining the fuel out of my airplane. They kept draining it. Whoa, 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 that's enough. But I had enough to get back. Here we are. We have now hired, in addition to the guy out of Krell up in New Hampshire, we sent him to Iceland. He found Helge Bjørnsen, a professor over at the University of Iceland, and he's come up with the subsurface radar and the oscilloscope and the bicycle with the trigger on it. They have laid out a sure enough grid, and every 100 feet and take a picture and go back in the, what's the
Jan Svensson.
Jan Svensson and Taylor, Neil, Gordon Scott, and Norman Vaughan. Norman Vaughan went with Admiral Byrd to Antarctica in 1928.
Wow.
And he heard about us, wanted to go, and he did.
They would take, they had a Yashica camera, and they would take pictures of the oscilloscope and then take the film into their tent and develop the film in their tent. And these are the prints that they would make. And they came up with they said, what this indicates is, number one, the planes are 5,000 feet away. They're a mile away. And two, they are 80 meters deep.
80 meters. We said 80 feet. He said, no, meters. We somewhere learned how to multiply by 3.
Yeah, Dr. Berenson, a geophysicist, says, I know the difference between feet and meters. Anyway, that's an airplane right there.
Really?
Wow, did you see that?
they'd gone out and they put a red flag. They put a red flag over all 8 airplanes. Like Richard said, they were a mile or more where the coordinates we had, because we heard somewhere glaciers move. So over 45 years, they had moved a mile or 2 miles, and these guys had actually found them back in '83 for R.J. Reynolds. We didn't know that. Here we are in '88. They've found them again for us. All you got to do is pay them to come find. And so
There's Neil right there.
Yeah.
This is inside the DC-3. Now, you all know about, there's Dr. Dan for you. You know about weight and balance? Epps only learned half of it. It's just weight. And the balance part in the DC-3 is you keep on loading the plane and loading it, and if you get concerned about weight, you go back to the tail wheel, which sits about this high, and then you take your hand, and then the fuselage is right there. You take your hand in there, and you check to see if you can get your hand between the wheel, and as the fuselage comes down, then when you get to where you can't get your hand in this way, you know what you do? Put your hand in this way. That's him.
so we get,
How
isn't
about
that
that?
beautiful? Those mountains, really, if you get any chance to go on a cruise on the Kulasuk on the west side, east side, and of course then there's Baffin Island before you ever get that. Only ski-equipped DC-3 in Georgia.
Really?
Don Brooks.
Isn't that neat? I'll tell you, for those of us who are raised on Lycomings and Continental engines, when you sit up in that cockpit and you have this big radial sitting there turning 1,800 RPM, it is something else. And so we all got some DC-3 time in it. This is sitting up on the ice cap with the DC-3, trying to make movies, I guess. Those are the skis. And that's the rest of the fleet. Who can name this one? Dornier. Absolutely, the ugliest airplane ever built. But the thing is incredible. I think you could fill that thing with lead and it'd still fly. Then the Navajo, we flew Navajos back and forth a pretty good bit. There's the Cessna, an Aztec, and then a couple of times we had to get hauled off by helicopter. Altogether, we had 7 expeditions up there. And then we see how you guys work on airplanes. The window, we'd overloaded the DC-3 one time so that it was so heavy, it would not get across the ice cap. So we had to haul in one of Epps's MU-2s, and the window broke in it, so we duct taped it all back, sent it back to Atlanta.
Yeah, the other part of that story is everything we took off, we put back on
Yeah.
for the flight over Greenland.
All right. Here's Captain Epps. He's the left seat. This is Kulasuk. This is where we're staging from. It's 100 miles from the site. It's just a gravel strip. They do plow it. And believe it or not, when you come off the ice cap, this looks like this looks like a wonderful airport. And when this video was taken, there was some tourists there from China, and they had their cameras watching the landing. Their cameras were going.
For whatever reason, that's my first landing up there, and about half mile out, I forgot everything, and I just drove it right into the runway.
Into one of the bumps.
And that's what they put the big tires on there so they'll bounce. There's 5 pilots in the cockpit. My brother Doug, he loved to take that all around Delta showing his little brother.
Too bad there's not some
screwed up the
audio in
land.
Yeah.
It hit and bounced, it hit and bounced, and hit and bounced. Harley's saying, put the flaps up, put the power, anyway,
Yeah,
on and
give us some
on.
power,
I get a
come
lot of
higher.
good advice.
Push it over.
Finally, it come to a stop.
Go ahead.
I say it's too bad there's not some audio, because there were, I think, 5 pilots in the cockpit. Everybody had an opinion.
Yeah, they were all standing up except the 2 guys in front seat.
Those that fell down. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so then we get out on the ice cap. This is about our 5th or 6th expedition. We're getting bigger time. We had the DC-3. And then as a test for all of the personnel, they have to carry a 55-gallon drum 5 miles without snowshoes.
Oh my gosh.
Who said they were empty? All right, there we are. This would be, what, 89, when we set up we were then convinced the planes were 250 feet deep, and we set up a melt head to melt the shaft down to the airplane. And Don Brooks down in
Douglas,
Georgia, this is a heated melt head. We run hot water through that, and then the shaft is a 13-stage deep well pump. So it's like a giant hot plumb bob, and you just lower that hot plumb bob down and through the glacier, and as it melts its way, the pump will pump water out, and that way you get a dry hole. Well, we thought we were real smart. Nobody that we know of has ever done that before.
So the snow up there is just like around here, granular until you get about 70, 80 feet. Then it becomes hard ice.
Blue
like
ice.
Blue ice, like your ice cubes in the refrigerator. And the thermal meltdown generator went through that first 70 feet, got there, and you just got a hand-operated chain hoist, letting it go down slowly, melt its way down. And then it hit the hard ice, and you let it down some more. Well, it has not cut a hole. It just laid down. And ever after, we began to call it the gopher, like you have in your lawn.
That 70-foot depth is called a Fern Line, F-I-R-N, Fern Line, and that's also the water table. And everything above that will thaw, well, not everything, the surface will thaw above that, and that water, as it thaws, goes down and adds to the Fern Line. So that Fern Line, you think, keeps moving up. But at the bottom of the blue ice, it's against Mother Earth. It has a geothermal warmth of the earth, and it melts out fresh water into the ocean. And it all seems to be, as far as we can tell, it's stabilized.
Wow.
And there we are up on the ice cap. We put out, you'd think there'd be plenty of water with all that ice around, but we put out black plastic because there's solar gain around the clock. You put out black plastic, throw snow on it, and then water will come down into that tub. And that's how we got our water to heat to run the melting device. And that's just setting up camp. When you set up a tent, you go out and you dig a hole 12 feet in diameter, about 3 feet deep, take that snow, put it on the north side, and build a wind wall. Then you put your tent down below the surface because the wind always blows. And because Greenland has nothing to stop it from blowing. It's just all the time, cold wind. And that's just a pretty picture up on the ice cap setting up camp. This was 1990, and we set up that tent on the right. You can just see the top of it. We went up in May. We thought we'd get there early, get in there in springtime, but by our standards, it was still very cold, and
Taylor, being the architect, fire code, the doors have to open out.
Of course they do.
And so
look at those doors.
we
They
had
open out.
we had these nice huts Brooks had put together, doors open out until you put 8 feet of snow on the outside of it. They don't open at all. And luckily, Gordon Scott didn't like us He was a hermit. He was 100 feet north of us, but he woke up. Yeah, we woke up too, but we couldn't get out. He could, because he's from Anchorage, and he walks down the hill, shovels us out, on our way.
Well, it's part of the learning curve. And then, any ham radio operators? KC4FST? Doesn't mean a thing. There we are. That's a ham operator station.
Flag gives you some idea of the wind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's the tents. That's the, you can't see it, but this is part of the yellow tent here.
Oh, yeah.
And it goes all the way across.
The work tent.
When it was snowing pretty good. There's the DC-3 in the background, looking down Main Street, and that's the mess hall. And that's inside the tent. That's scowling Neil Estes right there, scowling at poor old Lou Sapienza, who's going through some kind of withdrawal symptoms. And I mean, it happens. But look how well stocked it is.
We have graduated from the Burnson burner to electric stove, and I don't think we need a refrigerator. We got fresh eggs instead of MREs, and we're doing great. You can see the snow. Here we are, 185. When you land, and as it rolls to a stop, it has made the snow water. The water then freezes, and now you're stuck. And the airplane, with the engine going full blast, won't move, so you got to dig it out. On the DC-3, we found out, after I looked like I was breaking the tail off, bouncing it up and down, found out we could retract the skis. It would sit down and break the skis loose, then put the skis back down, raise the air, good hydraulic system on the skis, and raise the plane up, and so finally learned something.
Then in 1990, we got some help through the Smithsonian and actually Senator Nunn. And the Air Force did have a training mission up to the site. They sent up was he a major? And
Lieutenant Colonel Ray Tousey.
Ray Tousey. And he came up and put up the flags for it, and they came in and flew in, how many loads?
There were 5 C-130s, 5 different landings. They brought us 60,000 pounds. At this time, 1990, we were partnerships with Angelo Pizzagalli out of Burlington, Vermont, big contractor, and he brought in these huge generators and steel and a 17-foot silo unloader.
And this is the nose wheel of the C-130 with skis, and it was so much of a drag, and I just took a picture of it. And so there we are, pulling our subsurface radar, and up here, that is not a KKK thing. That's Dr. Bruce Bevan, geophysicist from Philadelphia, and he went snowblind, and we had to keep him in his tent for, I think, 2 days. And then we brought him out, masked him up, put his goggles on underneath him, so that we could go out looking for the airplanes.
That was 86, and here we are in 88 with or later, and the radar and the recorder oscilloscope, because 88 we find them, we go back 89, 90, 92. So we had, those 4 times, we had to hire the Icelanders to come find them again. So each time, one more trip.
This is the old DC-3. One of the worst things that can happen is the temperatures get moderate and the surface turns to slush, and you can't take off in slush. And you can run these things till the engine's glow. you do is you wait until the wee hours in the morning when the sun is to the north and very low, and you don't have okay, that was the DC-3, and this is the C-130 coming in.
The C-130s would not land unless the runway was packed. So the DC-3, my brother Doug and Harless get out, run up and down our skiway, packing the snow so the C-130s can land.
When the C-130 came in, our deal with the Air Force was that they would have this mission if the Greenland Expedition Society, which is the group that we formed to do this, would pay for the gas. So when the C-130 came in and landed, I ran out, yelled up to the captain of the airplane. I said, the captain comes down. They didn't shut the engines down. The captain comes down, and it turns out to be absolutely the prettiest woman you've ever seen in your life. I mean, here we are, all these grizzly old guys out, and she said, "Sir, we can be out here 6 weeks, and we're not going to turn those motors off." Yes, ma'am. But then they all wanted to come over and see the hole and all of that, but they were very, very helpful. Okay, so then once you have a flag over an airplane, to really locate it precisely, you go out and you take a rod that has a spray nozzle on the end, and you put it down into the earth, and then you have 300 feet of hose that you pull over your shoulder, and you melt this 6-inch diameter hole down until it hits something. And so this first picture, you've all been in partnerships before. And there's always one partner whose back is bent, whose brow is furrowed, who's laboring intensively trying to get the job done.
And his partner's praying for him. Okay.
You're praying, like, can't you go any faster?
All those words that he's saying.
Anyway, you go down there and you finally, and you move over, you miss it, you move over 5 feet and you miss it again. You have to haul up 300 feet of heavy hose full of water, then you go over and do it again, and then finally it will go down and thump, and man, that is big time, big time. So then you think you've located an airplane, you come over, and right at the bottom of this, we put in a plastic, we took these PVC pipes, had them threaded before we left with couplings on them, and you sleeve that hole because we want a hard edge on it, because then we're going to put a drill which looks like this, a hole drill, and you go down inside that plastic sleeve, and with handles at the top, you hand drill whatever it is you've hit. And we came.
That's a keyhole saw, you know, only about 1 inch in diameter, and we're going down all those plastic casing was 10-foot sections with a coupling on each one, so 25 couplings sections we had to put together. Then after we get the casing in, we put in a drill shaft, which is the conduit, and all we are doing here is tighten it up. And our way incorporated, Bobby Bailey she had about 400 people, 2 or 3 engineers. They developed or come up with this idea. The handlebars here are to keep, there's another one up here. So you take this one out, and that one up there will keep you from dropping it into the hole. And you put another section of pipe on, and you go 25 times till you have what you need. And then we start turning the crank, and you saw the result. We, of course, right there, a piece of aluminum tubing. It's not a beer can.
A piece of what kind of tubing?
Aluminum.
You can't say it. Say it again.
Aluminium.
Yeah, that's it.
Aluminum too.
That's close, he's getting better. Anyway, that's out of the engine of one of the B-17s.
And they put the engineers, put it, what, anyways, keep from the piece falling off after it was on. But that was, of course, you shoot for the B-17 first, that's the biggest target. So you go for the B-17 and that's off of the, I guess, number 2 engine, we'll say, of the B-17.
And part of this, the deal was, at this point, we've been fooling with this thing 8 or 9 years, and we had the rights of search and salvage granted by the Danish government. Denmark at that time was a protectorate of Greenland. And we went to Copenhagen, got those rights, and they were getting nervous about us not producing anything, and they wanted us to have positive proof of the existence of the airplanes. And this gave us positive proof of the airplanes, and that extended our rights for another, however long we needed it. But so this was very important. And to me, at least, this was kind of the pinnacle of the whole expedition. Of all of those years and the science that we were creating, that it all worked, and we found an airplane and came up with positive proof. After that, it was just work of digging it up, which was no small thing.
You did an incredible job.
This is, we would melt a 3-foot diameter hole, and then you move that melt head over 5 feet and do another one.
His attitude, his enthusiasm.
That's what it looks like, getting ready to go down the hole. Right here, I think we have 2 holes, so maybe 3 or 4. Pat and I went up to Ohio State University. They have one of the most advanced archaeological institutes. It's the Richard E. Byrd Institute there. And they had us give this presentation to their class. And they said it was the deepest penetration of the glacier that actually accomplished work that they knew of.
How far down?
250 feet, 25 stories.
It was a 15-minute ride.
Really? Oh, wow.
All right, so then we had perfected this 1 meter in diameter hole, and then we took Pizza Galli up there in 1990. And he took a silo unloader. You know, the grain silos they have?
Yeah.
And it has a horizontal Archimedes screw that goes around and it eats out the silage and blows it out windows in the side of the silo. So that's the Archimedes screw on the very top left-hand side. And he started augering this hole big enough to bring out big parts of an airplane. And this lower right, and maybe, well, this one's still shallow, but in the lower right, that went down to the, what, 70 foot, 100 feet?
125 feet, got down, and for some reason we knocked off work, went out the next morning, it's half full of water, up to the Fern Line.
Yeah, remember I said the water table was at 70 feet down? Well, they had penetrated it, and the water seeped in overnight and filled, the hole was too big to pump out. And the smaller holes that we had worked on, Neil and Pat and I, it was small enough to pump the water out. So that all failed. And this is our regular work temp. We got a 700,000 BTU boiler over here. Run water down to the gopher head.
It lasts to the middle of the pipe, comes up to the nose cone.
That's the melt head of the 3 foot diameter.
And then it goes up to the gopher, around the top, and then there's the real picture. Working guys. Three horses over there. Now, just see what you're doing. What's the read? 91. 91. 92. 55. Do it.
These are inlet temperatures and exit temperatures to see how efficient the melt head was doing. And there's a single hole going down, and life on the ice cap. It's all fun. And there, this shows when we would put a series of these holes together, then you auger out the web between the holes, because when you only have one hole this big, you can bring up machine guns and the cannon and propeller blades and things. Then as you get two holes, you can bring up bigger things, but you need 6 holes. You need a slot 6 holes wide to bring up the things. So we start hauling stuff up as we're melting more holes. And of course, this fellow has no safety harness on, but I told him to stand there while I took his picture and then put the safety harness on. And that's what it looks like when you get down into the blue ice. And this is kind of the magical part of all of the work we did. Because as you go down there, the tube becomes kind of a sonic tube. And every drop of water that comes up, it becomes, you get the harmonics of every sound in this vertical tube. And so you go down through this musical experience, and you can look off into the glacier, because you got these 1,000-watt lights that will shine into the ice, and you can see probably 10 feet into the ice. So claustrophobia is not an issue, and you get this magical music.
Isn't it?
What's the temperature down at that elevation?
I'm sorry?
What's the temperature down in 250
degrees?
How much?
That's 32.
32?
Everything is right at the edge of melting. I thought that as we got farther away from the surface, that the surface would, like in your swimming pool, the top inch of water, even in the wintertime, will be warm, and that the surface would be hot. As you got colder, lower, it'd go down to absolute zero. But it isn't the way it is. It is right on the edge of freezing or of thawing. And there's old Gordon Scott. We got down to the B-17. He's sitting there on the top turret. And
It was 1990. Because I like to tell the tale, one of the crewmen did not walk out.
we had to thaw him out. No, we didn't. That's Gordon Scott. We dressed him up and took his picture. But down here on the gun turret, the machine gunner for that turret has his girlfriend's name on it, Marion. But if you rotate the turret around, who was Dorothy?
Dorothy.
And there's a P-38, 250 feet deep. That is the same one that we saw with the straight propellers at the beginning of this talk. And it's before we took the machine guns out. And there again is Gordon Scott. He's on the end of a 250-foot rope. And you get down to the airplane, and you send somebody out there, and they melt out a small hangar around the airplane, but they leave a shaft between the booms, because if there's a cave-in or a collapse, there's no contingency. There's no back. We put a marker on the up on the surface. Yes, sir.
What did you use to melt the cabin around?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
What did you use to melt the cabin around?
Oh, just a hose.
Spray hot water.
Hot water hose, and it goes down, the water goes down.
Neil went down there with an ice pick initially, and they found out hot water would do it faster. The picture of the guy with the gun turret was 1990. This is 92. Of course, 1990, we got to the B-17, it was crushed. So, of course, we come back, and that's the end we will, you know, you're not going to find an airplane that's salvageable. And because the B-17 crushed, Don Brooks had put up money. He got the guns from the B-17, and they won exhibit here 3 months ago over at Fulton County. But here we are, 1992. Like I say, we come back in 90, planes crushed. Of course, we're not going back. And then a year goes by, and anybody know about the Downwind Restaurant over at PDK? You sit there and you have a glass of juice, and all of a sudden, the fighter planes, those P-38s, will be in perfect shape. And so we keep talking to ourselves. So we're not going to fly them out, but we know where they are. We know how to get to them. And so all we got to do is go back up there and get us a P-38. Will be in perfect condition. And to us, that looks perfect. Not knowing much, we had a gun buff with us. He cleans up the 50 caliber gun and the 20 millimeter cannon, and we fire both of them with a 1942 ammunition.
The nose of the P-38, it has this hood, it's like an old Buick. You lift up the hood on both sides, and there's all your machine guns. And that's the reason for the twin engines, is so that they could put all of this firepower in the center, and the pilot can look right down the tracers. And there's 4 50 caliber machine guns. And then this is the magazine for the 20 millimeter cannon. And then over here, these Army Air Force pilots had hard hats and an oxygen bottle to bail out at high altitudes. And then that's a can of Prince Albert's in a can.
Half and half.
Half and half?
I found it.
You got it?
No.
Okay.
I was
And,
told I'm
that's
not supposed to keep souvenirs, you know, so I believe it.
And there is bringing up the engines, and the picture in the upper right is a very, very historically important picture. I want everybody to study it, because you will see, I gotta point it.
Notice-
There's Pat Epps
With
working.
white gloves, you know, when you go to the library, looking at old books, they want you to put on the white gloves. We're looking at an old engine, so I had to put on the white gloves. He required me to.
Yeah, well, I just
Before
want-
you touch that engine, put on these gloves.
Yeah. Anyway, those engines were in great shape, except Roy, who rebuilt it, Schaffner, put on rebuilt engines.
Anyway, here we are, 1992. In 1990, we left a bunch of equipment there. We had a Bobcat that we left and put it all together. And here they are with nothing to do, so they dig down to here in 92, they go down to the 1990 supply bin and find it is 32 feet below the surface. It doesn't snow up there.
And the way you dig down is you shovel up from one layer to the next layer to the next layer. Then they got down to the Bobcat, cranked it up, and it ran, and it could eat its way out.
Oh, this is okay.
And this is
I'll take a
just
picture of
the
the crate.
typical looking around
Little Jim
the
Lane coming
camp.
back.
The weather was
Looking
mostly
in.
like this. It was mostly
Looking around here.
wintry.
That's the Icelander's tent. Pat in my tent.
That's Main Street.
Gordon in his tent. I guess that's,
Sorry.
I don't know, I think I did.
That doesn't make it look so adventuresome, does it?
No.
It just looks like, man.
Kinda
That's what
like
I'm
nothing,
saying there.
nothing land.
I'll zoom in on that. You'll see 3 flags in a row.
There's 3 airplanes in a row.
Naval, Baker, and Charlotte.
And here we are hauling out the last pieces up there. Aft boom installed by Rogers and Kirkpatrick on the swing shift. And we tried to locate these guys, but with no luck. And
There's the Bobcat right there.
That's old Neil pulling out. What is that, elevator section?
Looks like it, yeah.
You couldn't locate those fellas, or any relatives?
Could not.
Too bad.
Yeah.
And if you remember, the early Army Air Corps,
Yeah.
they had the red dot in the middle. And here they painted it over for the newer Air Corps. And that's holding up the wing sections, because now we have the big slot built. And is that the 10?
No, that's a
machine
50
gun.
caliber gun.
We had the best armed snowmobile on because later we took the 50 caliber off and we put the 20 millimeter on, then got a 55-gallon drum and put in some jet fuel in the bottom, so that then fired the cannon into it and it blows up just.
I have a question. Oh, you're not wearing any gloves or jackets, is it warm at that point? Or you get used to
Yes,
it?
and
or-
in August, it's well above freezing, and maybe it gets up to 50 degrees.
Oh,
And
okay.
you really don't like that, because it turns everything into slush and your feet are
Right.
wet
Yeah.
and everything. It's so much better if it stays just below freezing.
Yeah.
But in the summer, it's 50 would be about top, would it?
Yeah,
Not something
I'd
like
say
that.
that'd be the max.
It's a wet
There's
cold.
Captain Klondike.
Yeah.
We blew up the motor on the DC-3. It's sat out there for 2 or 3 weeks. We got another motor. No, we
Just changed the cylinder on it,
3 cylinders.
tightened up.
Yeah.
Well, we just ran it,
Now just one.
kept putting oil in it and flushing out the filter until we could take off. Let it run for 5 minutes and then shut it off and fly to 100 miles.
Actually, it ran 7 minutes from the time we started it until the time we shut it down. Oil pressure was going south.
Neil,
I think it was south.
we had a mechanic with us and he's watching the oil pressure fall and he says, shut it off, feather. We will. Anyway, they were getting impatient. Here we are, and 92.
Brad McManus. He's the guy that I said 50 years later. He was the guy standing next to the upside down P-38. We took him up on the ice cap and had a ceremony on the 50th anniversary of the ditching.
There's OE2, who was based at Agmasalik, 1942, and rode out in part of the rescue team that came out to pick up the 25 airmen.
And
Board of Directors.
there it is. That's the board of directors, and this is our intrepid leader over here. We saw a lot of that. Just sort
Strategic
of
planning session.
deep thought.
Did he have his gloves on?
That's R&R. Yeah.
Okay, so we got all the wings and everything out. This wouldn't fit in anything that we
Center
could.
section.
So we had to call a helicopter. Helicopter comes in, picks up the center section, and then flies it the 90 miles back to Crevasse. And there's the center section right there. And that's what the edge of Greenland looks like in September? No, August 22nd. And the pack ice has not repacked yet. It's just ice flows.
We had taken a third of the airplane to Oshkosh, going to have a big show up there, raise more money, and they brought up the center section and put it on a ship at Kulisuk, and it went to Denmark, Sweden, and then into Savannah, Georgia.
Pat, I think you took this picture, didn't you? Anyway, you go out there and there's an iceberg that's got a freshwater lake in it. Isn't that pretty?
Yeah.
And so the plane gets back. We have a big party over at Epps hangar up at PDK. Then the plane goes up to Kentucky, to where Roy Schaffner was our partner in the last expedition that brought the plane up. So we were partners with Schaffner, and his rebuilding of that plane, and it is a complete rebuild.
They took 10 years from 92 to O2, rebuilt it, and we went up there, and we were not invited to the flight.
This is the first flight of Glacier Gal. Steve Hinton is flying it, and is that not the prettiest thing you've ever seen? And Schaffner and the Greenland Expedition Society ended up kind of at loggerheads for a number of reasons, but he did an extraordinary job of rebuilding the airplane. That plane is put together just the way, as well as it could ever be done.
Over the 7 expeditions, we spent about $2 million on all of the expeditions. He probably spent that much rebuilding it. They did a beautiful job, and there it is, Hinton flying it in Middlesbrough, Kentucky in 2002.
You know, I never noticed until today, they left the red dots in the star. And that thing sounds, you know, it's turbocharged, so that and the exhausts are on the top. That's the exhaust back there after the turbocharger. So it's got this quiet hum as opposed to a roar. Beautiful. And there's Nancy, my wife, and Ann, Pat's wife. She died 3 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
And they are the ones who put up with more than you can ever imagine. And they were incredible support. Incredible.
You're not going again, are you? Oh, no, we're not going.
No, we're done with that.
Trust me.
All right, so there you go. That's the camp. You can see the pack ice that goes out over the horizon. And there are 5 P-38s there, 2 B-17s, one missing a gun turret, which we have down, which Don Brooks has down there. And that's why we're here, because the commemorative Air Force really needs a P-38, and somebody said this is one of the richest group of people that have ever had a chance to brush the snow off of them.
Blow the snow, brush the snow off, break them up, and fly them away.
But with global warming, those planes are just right under the surface.
Who owns the airplane now?
You guys got land to do one more time.
This
Rod Lewis.
Rod Lewis.
Rod Lewis of
In San Antonio, Texas.
Lewis Energy. He's
Do you
got a
guys
bunch.
have an interest in it or not?
What?
At this point?
Does he have an interest?
No, do you guys?
In his plane?
Yeah.
Oh, that's way out of our league.
Is it?
No, we sold our half to Schaffner when he wanted to rebuild it, and after a couple of years, we settled up with him, and he then rebuilt it and flew it up in Middlesbrough in 2002. And he died about 6 years ago. The family sold it, and Rod Lewis in San Antonio owns it and takes it all around, flying and to the air shows. And,
But I think he paid $7.2 million for it.
He paid that?
Yeah.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
Well, you said he got a lot of these.
Yes, George.
a lot of zero.
When Glacier Gal went down, how many hours were on the airplane?
44, 45? What I
40, yeah, something like
in the 40s.
50 hours.
New
No more than
airplane.
50 hours.
The whole fleet was pretty much running.
How did you choose this particular airplane rather than one of the
The
others?
straight props.
Pardon?
The straight props. We had pictures of all of the planes, and some of the propellers were torn off right at the hub. And this one was the last one that landed, and they tweaked the props so that they would be good. And we picked up.
Thinking that they were
Very
gonna fly
smart.
it out of there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Other than the machine guns from the B-17 that you examined, were any other components of the aircraft, like the control column wheel, any flight instruments removed?
Yeah. Yeah, the
I don't
pedestal got removed.
Yeah, we took
Wheel.
out the throttle. We took out the throttle quadrant, and it was good. There's a lot good about it. But what happened is the plane apparently filled with water during a thaw, and the top 3 feet or so was crushed down with the subsequent year of snow. But
the most prominent vertical component in the B-17 was the seat armor, the seat back armor. Everything else was laying on the cockpit floor.
Just crushed. Yeah.
Squashed. Lighter than like Godzilla stepped on it.
Yes, sir.
How sure were you about the structural stability of that shaft, especially the first 70 feet?
Jerry.
Yeah, Richard.
Probably
There's some things you
100%. I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's like if you melt a hole in a cube of ice, it's not going to cave in. But we were very confident of that.
If we had the video, if we had the video of the stress crack, whatever it was called, that occurred while I was in the hole, it was like a cannon going off.
Yeah.
And the video actually shows a speed of sound movement on the far wall that coincided with that boom.
But to give you a serious answer to that, up at Thule, at the very top of Greenland, the U.S. government built a facility called Camp Century, and it is an underground, under glacier facility with a nuclear power plant. And we had pictures of that, and it showed spaces bigger than this room with a flat ceiling and no supports. And so that gave us confidence that it won't cave in. And ice does have a compression and tension. It has a tensile force to it that, say, concrete doesn't. When you design something in concrete, you assume that the concrete will come apart. It has no tensile force, but ice does. So we felt pretty good about it, but you know, we had made so many mistakes along the way. You just can't be sure that things that you figure out are right.
And you were working at 250 feet during this period of time. From then to now, what would be your best guesstimate of what that would
Close
cost?
to 350.
350, another 100 feet.
330.
Probably 5 feet a year.
Yeah.
One interesting aspect of the hole is that the ceiling in the hole looked like sheetrock.
Yeah.
Absolutely flat.
And it didn't worry you until something cracks. Then that worries you. And the plane that has the two booms that go back to the tail, the whole tail section had moved back 10 feet. And apparently there was a crevasse that had occurred that pulled it apart. Then it filled with water because the booms went back and stopped, and then you keep on digging, and there's the elevator and the rudder and the tail assembly.
When you see those control cables, those stainless steel wire rope cables, just pulled
Stretched.
apart in tension, pretty impressive.
All right, in conclusion to this, I'd like to offer a quote from T.E. Lawrence. Remember T.E. Lawrence? Lawrence of Arabia? He wrote a book called The 7 Pillars of Wisdom. And in that book, he said, all men dream, but not equally. Those who dream at night in the dusty recesses of their mind wake in the light of day to find that it was but vanity. The dangerous ones are those who dream by the light of day with their eyes wide open, for they will make it happen. T.E. Lawrence.
Wow.
And that's it. Thank you.
If you got questions, or if you got questions, come up, and if you're embarrassed, come up and talk to Neil. He handles the embarrassing.